afternoon, everybody. I think we'll get started. Thanks for joining us. My name is Goldie Blumenstick. I'm a senior writer at the Chronicle of Higher Education. And if you're in the right room, you're here for the panel on Will Adult Students Save Higher Education? We don't have a title for that, but that's what the panel is. First thing to say about the title, we all come in with these titles, and then we all want to change the titles right away. Obviously, that title has a lot of market and sort of a crass commercialism, which I think is probably not ultimately the most appropriate way to think about this market. I think or even to think about a market at all. I just think that's not really the right way to think about it. I think a more appropriate term might be just the imperative to serve adult students, and to talk a little bit about why that is. I think who are we talking about here is really, right now in the United States, there's about 36 million students with some college and no degree. And that's, if you add in the number of students who've graduated from high school and didn't start any college, that number adds up to about, so I wrote it down, 79 million. So we are talking about quite a lot of students in the population right now who could really benefit from some form of post-secondary education. Obviously, the adult market, the adult student population is a much bigger market than that for higher education. There's the grad student universe as well. There's sort of a whole level of continuing education. It's been my experience from covering the higher ed for the last almost 30 years now that the grad student market seems to have evolved itself pretty well. I think in the grad programs, people seem to have found ways to make that market work. Students can find the programs when they want them and how they need them. It feels like in the undergraduate level is where the gaps are greatest and where the demand is sort of the most serious, not just for the institutions themselves, given the demographic challenges that many colleges are going to be facing in many parts of the country, particularly in the Northeast and the Midwest, but frankly also for the sake of our country. I think we know we have a country that is divided educationally, and if colleges don't figure out a better way to serve students and get them some education beyond high school, there's going to be more economic dislocations and more social and cultural dislocations as well. And luckily, though, we have this terrific panel here today to help us start to sort of forge our ways through some of these discussions. I'm going to get you all involved in this pretty quickly, but first, by way of introduction, what I thought I was going to do, what I do is go through our panel. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, but not by giving a speech. They're going to tell you, sort of take this question. If we all understand, a lot of people in this room have heard the phrase, culture beats strategy every time. At the end of the day, it's the cultural questions that make the difference. So I'm going to ask each of these people to tell you who they are, but by doing that, tell you their perspective on what's the one cultural thing that they would want to see changed that would result in better serving adult students in this country. And so with that, I'm going to sort of introduce the panel this way. First with Jonathan Finkelstein from Credly, founder of Credly. So I'm going to put this mic down because we're short one mic. And this is kind of heavy to do a lounge act with, by the way. So Jonathan, tell us a little bit from your perspective, what's the one cultural thing you'd want to change?
I think if there's one cultural thing that I would change, I think kind of sounds like the beauty contest question, where there's one thing you could change in the world, but I think it's already beginning to change, and I would say that it's about building a culture of recognition that is not only tied to degrees and perhaps even professional certificates, but recognizing that achievement and competencies are demonstrated in all different kinds of places, and the recognition of those skills and competencies should be portable. It should be a culture in which individuals own their own records and in which there isn't a sort of three-quarters fallacy that you can spend three-quarters of the time and three-quarters of the expense or three-quarters of a portion of your lifetime pursuing some kind of experience but have nothing to show for it. So I would say a culture of recognition that makes skills, competencies verified and portable.
Becky?
Yep.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Becky Takeda-Tinker, and I'm president of Colorado State University Global Campus. We have been serving non-traditional adult students for about the last decade now. I think we just crossed 10 years. We were founded in 2007. So when I think about coming from where we've come, it is about the acceptance of what is different, and that is led by experimentation. So I think that in higher ed, you know, my background's actually business. I do have a PhD, but it is from business. And so coming in, everything is based on what's already been done in the research and looking at all that. Well, when we look at this sector, which now is 75% of all students in higher education, there isn't as much research as there needs to be in order to really be successful in this. So the acceptance of experimentation, of live research with small cohorts, small tests with students to really understand what is it that drives their engagement and their student success is really going to be important as we look towards the future.
Iris, who are you? Why you? What's your
Yes,
background?
absolutely. My name is Iris Palmer. I am a senior policy analyst at New America. We're a think tank in DC. And my perspective on this definitely comes from the policy lens. I was doing a landscape analysis to kind of get a sense of what the research base was around serving adult students, and it is very thin. But every 5 years, you'd get another report that basically highlighted how adults are the coming new college students. So it started in like 1975, then it was like 1980, 85, all the way up through the 90s. Last big wave was back in like the mid 2000s. And I think there needs to be a cultural change that actually sinks in, where policymakers realize that people who are not directly out of high school, who end up going back to higher education, didn't screw up the first time, that is the new nature of our economy. It is what we live in now, and policy needs to be made around that to enable new, different programs and things that actually work for the student population.
Great. Sharon, this is, by the way, very unusual for a tech conference. We actually have a faculty member here.
I know, it says dean, but I'm not a dean. And I keep saying, if I actually were the dean, they'd give me a raise. Anyway, my name is Sharon Szymanski. I'm an associate professor and also, in the meantime, an interim associate dean at the Harry Van Arsdale Jr. Center for Labor Studies, which is part of Empire State College, which is a SUNY school. Empire State College serves non-traditional working students since the 70s. It was really one of the first state schools that served that population. But the population I work with, I think, is definitely needs the recognition of a cultural change. We work primarily, exclusively, I should say, with trade unionists in the New York City area. We work with electricians, paraeducators, plumbers, machinists, some carpenters. And I think what people don't understand is that the labor movement, labor studies, a recognition of labor education provides a whole new area of people wanting degrees, wanting to know about the environment in which they live so they can change it, pretty much. We've had people, just to give you an example, we had a panel not that long ago of fast food workers who were there explaining their fight for 15, and I'm sure you're all aware of that, right? $15 minimum wage. None of them spoke English. We had translators. They had never been in a college building. And afterwards they said, what do we need to do to come here and get a degree? And I don't think people are actually paying enough attention to this whole group of workers, immigrant workers who are in worker centers, who are also looking for education. We also work with a lot of paraeducators. These are the people who are in classrooms helping the teachers. Again, an overlooked population. Also, another group that came to us are caregivers. Again, another group that has been overlooked and not given the recognition and the validation of their own experiences and how that can be leveraged, let's say, into educational experiences.
I'm Ulrich Christensen. I'm a physician originally, but I've been on a 15-year detour into education, and I'm not leaving anytime soon. More than anything else, I'm a learning scientist. I like to do science and these things, but given that the science approach is already taken, I'll pick something else. But I think that is one of the most important things culturally. We've looked over the last decade and a half on unconscious incompetence. So this concept or actually 25 years almost, we started in medicine. This concept where adult learners do not know what they don't know. This is a really problematic cultural thing that we are focusing on the things we know, not where we need to improve. Harvard Business Review published an article that I wrote recently, where we showed that 22% of the interactions we had with a company in IT, they were unconsciously incompetent. It's a really high number. So if there's one cultural thing, is this aspect of prioritizing, being able to reflect on your own learning and your own behavior and your own performance, and make it like not only something that is permitted, but something that you're obliged to. Think about pilots. If they don't report near misses, it's suspicious. We don't do that in education.
Gail, you all heard a shout out for Gail earlier. So this is Gail.
So I'm Gail Mello. I'm president of LaGuardia Community College here in New York City. And while this is how you can tell an old academic pro, we're like, I'm going to sneak in 5. And so you have to start with, there's no reality to our understanding of who a college student is, because 30% of the college students are over the age of 25. So already, even undergraduates, sort of like that, it's a huge and important issue. There also, I'm going to add to the idea that the only people we need to serve are those who are who have credits but no degrees, because there are a huge number of people, and you began to speak of them, who are immigrants, who have a high school diploma, who are 40 years old, who barely made it through high school. I mean, there's like a huge market out there. But what I will really say instead is that the other adults that I think we need to think about technology educating are the faculty members themselves. That we don't use what I would call adult learning practices in the teaching of faculty. We don't require faculty to do the kind of self-reflection that Ulrich has said. And I think at a time when it used to be like the top 2% of people went to college, and then even if you were a god-awful professor, it didn't matter. The kids who are in your classroom all look the same. They're all ready for college. That is not true anymore, and we have to really rethink the adults in front of the class, whether that's virtually or face-to-face, and how to use technology to improve their ability to teach more effectively.
Great. I know I want to do something without the microphones right now, but really quickly, to get a little bit of sense of what the interests are in the room. All of you here came to this room for a reason. If you have a reason to think about something that you're thinking about now about adults, a challenge that you've been wondering about for the adult students, an opportunity that you think there is available for the adult students, I'm just going to, like, the way my rabbi does it at our synagogue, I'm going to go around and sort of point to each table, and if you feel, or maybe like Quaker meeting, if you could just shout out 1 or 2 things that you want us to think of, that you want this panel to think about that's sort of on your mind. Keeping in mind that this is a panel that's prepared to talk about policy, pedagogy, making a connection between colleges and careers through different forms of credentials, poverty, and practice. And so I'm going to just sort of do this rabbi trick and kind of go around the room, and just, as I point to your table, I'm looking for like a willing volunteer place to start. If there's something, just quickly shout it out, something that you want this panel to be sure to address. We have a willing volunteer in the front here. Go right here.
Rapid learning of occupational skills.
Rapid learning of occupational skills. Someone take notes on that? Okay. Anybody else over here? Anybody?
Opportunities for entrepreneurs to address the needs of adult learners.
Opportunities for entrepreneurs. That's an excellent topic. Out there. Yes.
Balancing technology in the classroom for generational learning.
Balancing
Using technology, there's something about generational learning.
This whole notion. Is there something called generational learning? Maybe. Okay.
And then how technology with older people aren't as.
Oh, right. The digital divide. The generational divide. Did you have something? Impact of blockchain. That's a whole second section, but obviously it does relate a lot to credentials, I think, and how we sort of follow the academic how you keep your credentials in front of you. Anybody else in the back? Go ahead.
Degree management for potentially working or part-time students?
Degree management.
For working or part-time students?
Okay, I'm not quite sure what that means, but if we don't hit it,
Sort of how do they manage their courses, their paths to degree completion, what course they take, how do they time how many courses they're taking?
okay, like time management almost as well. Well, look, if we don't get to it by the Q&A part, come back to us. Guy in the back?
Best practices in developmental education at the college level.
Very good. Okay. That's great. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Wraparound services for adult students.
Wraparound services. I think, go ahead.
Sometimes it can be an isolating experience being an adult learner. So what type of strategies are available to support the students?
Strategies to support the isolated adult learners who feel that they need support when they're on their own kind of doing this. I think one in the back. Doing that.
The idea of meta university or accumulating credentials from a number of different institutions.
I know someone who wants to jump on that one. That's accumulating credentials from a number of different institutions.
We know adult learners are attracted to the time flexibility of virtual and online learning, but they also want that direct support from an actual instructor. How do you manage that? How do you provide more of that?
Balancing the online versus the face-to-face.
Well, not face to face.
No,
The
just
synchronous
interaction.
versus asynchronous.
The live professor.
Yeah, or if it's one-to-one or whatever.
Okay, and let's do one more and then we'll,
Corporations sponsoring programs for entry-level workers at Starbucks.
right, the Starbucks model, does that have legs in other places? Okay, this is great. This is actually really great. We could just take those questions and I could sit down. But actually I hope all of you sort of kept some of that in mind. Think about that a little bit as we sort of begin here. I asked you about the cultural change. Like that's sort of a broader thing. If you could put one thing into the system right now, make one practical change today, what would it be? Tomorrow, tomorrow you get to create your whole new, your new company, or the environment to which your company's selling, your new institution. You get to run Congress for a day. What's the most important change you'd make right now? Who wants to jump in? I think Iris has a
you
list
want me
of
to-
like 6 things probably.
I do have a list of like 6 things, but which is what makes it so difficult to
Okay,
have one.
You can do 2 or 3.
So for the policy environment to enable, actually a lot of the questions you all had are great and they're in the classroom and they actually need policies and things to enable institutions and to actually, in some cases, pressure institutions to make those changes that will serve adults better. And so I was thinking about it this way. There's sort of a set of program design policies, like around things like prior learning assessment, which actually is about the portability of credentials and credit and about being able to bring credit from many different places and then turn it into a degree. There's the data infrastructure, both the federal government and the state data infrastructure, and then even the institutional data infrastructure around predictive analytics and things like that. And then the last piece I would say that needs to change is the funding structure. So how do we fund things like prior learning assessment? How do we give institutions funding flexibility for some of those tools that we talked about earlier? And also, how do we create incentives for them actually to serve more adult students and serve them well? And allow those students to also have access to state financial aid, which is a real problem. So it's about making it affordable for them and also in the same time creating incentives for institutions to implement some of these, and colleges to implement some of these tools that are going to serve them better.
Who else wants to jump in here?
I have something. So if I could have a genie wish, it would be that these non-traditional adult learners would have the ability to get their official transcripts. I get all the reasons why institutions hold them back, but requiring students to keep retaking courses because they can't get their official transcript, which is an accreditation issue, is an extremely costly thing for Americans to continue to fund. And I've got to believe there's a better way that we can figure out to make that happen.
And that sounds like such a small thing, right? Like, that sounds like a
It seems
$50
so
problem.
easy, but it is got all sorts of longitudinal issues. But when we think about moving Americans forward, having them feel like education has a return on investment for them, it's very important. So,
Go, John.
I think what I would add is actually very similar to what Iris and Becky just shared as well, which is when I'm out talking or to institutions, academic institutions and training providers, one of the most common questions you get when you talk about issuing a new credential or a credential in digital format is, that's great, but will employers care about it? Will they notice? And I've come to realize recently that one of the core questions should be the reverse of that. If an employer issues a credential, will you accept it? The fact of the matter is, for the kinds of people that you set up this discussion to be talking about, working adults, adults with skills that aren't recognized, we're talking largely about working professionals who have skills that surely must check off some boxes of competencies and skills in degrees that they don't yet hold, or that they hold but haven't been recognized here in this country for that matter. And so I think thinking about ways to bundle workforce training, whether it's in formal programs like apprenticeships or in looking at data behind somebody's performance on the job.
Or in blockchain?
Or reading it from the blockchain for that matter, exactly, and bundling it into our pathways so it's not just thought of as prior learning assessment, but it's actually baked right into the pathways that we're crafting for people. And there are some groups and some schools, including some represented on this panel, that are trying to push the limits of that, but I do think that there's some policy changes that would facilitate it.
Sharon, I think your place, you do that there, and
Yeah,
can you
I'm-
tell us the limits of that too, though?
Well, I guess I would advocate for more trade unions. More, raise the unionization rate in the country. As you know, it's only 10.7%. In New York State, it's 23.6%. So New York State has the highest unionization rate in the country. In our program, as I mentioned, it's all trade unionists, and the union provides a scholarship to all their members. So, and it's in conjunction with the contractors, for example, in the electrical industry. Most of our students are electrician apprentices, and there's the Joint Industry Board in New York City. So the contractors, along with the union, provide the money whereby our students do not graduate with any student debt. So I think a monumental change would be to have more unions in conjunction with, or in partnerships with more businesses to provide these kinds of debt-free college experiences for students.
I think Iris wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to put in a plug because I think apprenticeship is really actually an amazing opportunity for most adults who can't necessarily stop working to go back to college. They need to make money at the same time. And we just recently released a paper about how to expand it into higher education and actually align it and make it more a part of college, because a lot of the areas that it's expanding into don't necessarily have the union intermediaries, and also at the same time require degrees to continue to move up in their field. So healthcare, for instance, is a really obvious place, but it's very different than the traditional trades. And so to expand it through the system and actually help more of these adults earn their degree and be able to get their work experience at the same time, we think it's a really cool possibility, but there's a lot of structural change that needs to happen, which I think was cool the way you highlighted that.
I don't mean to jump in, but I know people don't understand this about New York City, but in New York City, if you want to be a journeyman, which means you are a card-carrying electrician, you have to have the minimum of an associate's degree. So
An actual associate's degree
an
or an
associate's
equivalent of
degree,
associate's?
and that's the service that we provide.
Wow, that's
So-
unusual.
Right. So the apprenticeship program through IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 3, they provide it. Our students go through a 4-year apprenticeship program. As they're going through the 4-year apprenticeship program, which means they work every day, and they go to electrical theory classes 4 hours a week, and then they're required to go to college 1 day a week. So the college program is built right into their apprenticeship. So they cannot become a journeyman. They cannot attain that very valued status, because being an electrician is the highest paid trade that you're going to get to. In fact, I think some of our electricians get paid much more than our instructors. I know they do. Anyway, the apprenticeship program, yes, is very important, and particularly in New York City. All your electricians here have a college degree, if you hire a union electrician.
So someone mentioned the Starbucks program earlier on the employer thing. Obviously, Starbucks pitched this as they wanted to be seen as a very enlightened employer. Why do the contractors in New York City pay for this program?
There have been many studies, and also they have come to realize that a skilled workforce is really important. Electricians, I would challenge anybody here to look at the electrical theory book. I don't think I could be an electrician if I had to pass the electrical theory classes. They're also required to read really complicated blueprints. I'm sure everybody here has put together IKEA furniture. You know, you can't read those blueprints. If you have seen some of the blueprints that our students have to look at, it's quite challenging. So the contractors really welcome a skilled workforce, and not just skilled in their trades, but people who can problem solve, think critically. I mean, all these things that we all know.
I have to say, though, there's a lot of, I mean, it makes so much logical sense, right? But when you really work deeply with employers, I think somebody asked the question of how to rapidly obtain work skills. One of the things that's really hard is to get employers to fund that. And so there's this belief that magically you will go to college, and college looks very much like it did 40 years ago, and you'll pop out and you'll know how to work in the gig economy and be able to understand policy issues, and you won't. So one of the things I think that is a real opportunity for entrepreneurs, and where there is not a lot of extant data that I've seen, nor activity, is really making that connection deeply. I was just talking yesterday with the head of MetLife's operations and technology services, so they're worldwide. And one of the things he was talking about was the fascination he had of thinking about students coming from LaGuardia, because they speak so many different languages, but they were here in America, so they got an American context, and then putting that together with the kind of tech skills that you would need to serve a pretty traditional business. I mean, this is not an innovative business per se, but there's a lot of technology in there. There is no space right now for really looking at how to do that, and yet what we know about particularly adult learners is to make rapid use, to really acquire skills, it has to go back and forth between applied and theoretical. And so the model that you were talking about is very much how to do it, but we don't have a culture in America of asking businesses to put up. And so a lot of people talk about, apprenticeship is so wonderful, and let's look at Germany. But in Germany, the businesses are absolutely in the game. They are putting money there. They also have a very extensive healthcare system. I mean, there's a lot of other pieces there. So I think it's important to think of this systemically as opposed to programmatically.
Becky wanted to jump in.
Oh, no, if you want to.
If you have one that related to this.
So, on the comments regarding what we've been doing a lot of work in Colorado, headed by the governor actually, to come together with business. Getting business, so for the person who wanted to know about rapidly learning occupational skills, getting the businesses to come up with competencies, right? Higher ed knows how to write the curriculum to meet those outcomes, and that's what we do. But if businesses are unable to articulate specifically what the competencies are for certain jobs, it's where it begins. And so I hate to put that back on to yet another sector, but we can come together and create this. We've also been working with an apprenticeship group that's newly started I guess they're in their second year. We have been trying to articulate that credit, and my goodness, trying to get any accountability on hours. Yeah. That the young students serve, and the outcomes, demonstration of learning anything. has been very difficult. They keep sending back the same grid, and we keep sending it back saying, just what's the log? What is the, what are you getting back to prove that they've learned something? In Switzerland, I've looked at that model. I've actually been over to Switzerland. I toured an electronic component factory, and the kids, they are kids, 16, 17-year-olds, showed me their binders, and they've got like worksheets where they've pasted like component pieces and identified them. So there is actual demonstration of them having done something for the college credit. So those are two challenges we see in Colorado right now.
Becky, is there something that you're doing in Colorado are there some structures in place that are, I mean, we've talked about this in the prior panel also, the employers claim they want all this stuff, but they're not very good at articulating it. It's obviously coming up again. Are there some structures in place that you're using there, or does anyone know of any that are in some way scalable?
That is this new initiative for apprenticeships that we actually have created. It's about 2 years old now, where they are holding training programs for the kids, training programs for the employers, which we really like because we are getting 2 apprentices for IT. But that they're training both sides, right? So that we get our expectations aligned and we're really clear how we're supposed to manage this 16, 17-year-old. And the kid and their parents are learning what the child needs to do when they're with us and what's expected. So slowly but surely working there.
Only in that one set of models, though, right? Only in this
Only,
apprenticeship
yes,
program.
that the one.
I mean, there's a whole range of industries.
Yeah.
Even while there's a whole range of industries where there could be more apprentices, there's a whole range of industries beyond apprentices where there probably needs to be a lot more of this collaboration. All right, I want to hit Ulrich here.
So we've for the last 2 decades and a half or something been looking at many of these things in different areas. And while we've done a lot of stuff in higher ed, we've also done like last year's done a lot in corporate education. One of the things is that it's changing really, really rapidly right now. 7 years ago, there was almost no appetite in the corporate space to have this discussion. There was a check-the-box mentality that whether it was for all people who are already employed or it was trying to prepare the workforce to get to them, there was no real appetite for it. That is changing so rapidly now. Just the last year has been a landslide. So we're now having discussions with people who are interested in understanding this aspect of doing task analysis, and you're absolutely right. It is not something where it's a part of the culture to figure out what is actually needed to be a diesel truck mechanic. It's one of the areas we've been studying the last couple of years and developing products to do and to support and facilitate is, what do we actually do if you have all the FedEx and Walmart truck mechanics and diesel engine mechanics? How do we actually systematically improve those educations? How do we do the task analysis that lies behind when 1.6 million truck drivers will get out of a job? Maybe we should get some of these guys to be reschooled to go take care of the driverless trucks. But that requires us to be able to systematically do that task analysis. And that's not something you learn overnight. It's a very, very complicated area. Another aspect of it is that you're actually seeing in areas like healthcare where there is an accreditation system, where there is a rubber stamp being like, now you're a physician, now you're a neurosurgeon, now you're an orthopedic surgeon. But one of the ironic things is that the old joke about how you hide a secret from an orthopedic surgeon, anybody knows the answer? You publish it in a scientific journal. So the thing is that even those situations where for decades, while this joke was born, they had to undergo recertification. What is changing now is that we understand if we measure learning over time, instead of having these like artificial exams that are interjected, that may actually change. And New England Journal of Medicine, who we also work for, we build their learning platforms. When we look at how even super specialized people like physicians practice, if you take a formative environment where we meticulously measure the tasks and objectives that we've set out, very detailed, which means this is what you need to be a safe internal medicine physician, you actually have a much, much higher predictive value than the board exams. Or in other words, the board exams may actually have a higher risk of being wrong. So this is changing really rapidly. The surgeons have already decided to change. So if we then come back to where we've been working the last years, the truck mechanics, for instance, there is a huge opportunity if we do that task analysis right, if we do the learning engineering right, and we actually build systems that are measuring true measures, not the 20 questions at the end of a semester, let's hope we get those right, but actually measure it over time. I think we have a big opportunity here.
Who's the we in this conversation, though? If we
All
do-
of us.
Oh, yeah.
But we are obviously, the answer to the entrepreneurial aspects here, it's not something you fix overnight on a whiteboard. It's like, these are big investments and opportunities. But there is also like a wide space, like,
I mean, to me, some of that, what you've just described, is more almost social policy, economic policy, educational policy. I think this question was almost more specifically like, there are people here who are looking to invest in the sector, people are looking to create solutions to solve problems in the sector. You're looking for some of those kinds of answers. I want to get back to your question. I think I want to talk about one or two other bigger topics first, and maybe some of that will come up through that discussion, but definitely want to get to that question, because I'm really curious about the answer myself. I want to talk a little bit about teaching. One of the things that we hear a lot when I've been spending a lot of time doing some reporting about adult students and adult student models, and the things I hear all the time is that they want it faster, and they want it accelerated, and they want it to be, and obviously convenient. But I guess I wonder about this faster accelerated thing. I mean, how fast can it really get? And how realistic is that?
It's so much more realistic than you would think. I mean, so when you think about a fresh out of high school 17-year-old who is in their first class at LaGuardia Community College, they don't have a background of experience. They haven't faced things. They haven't struggled through things. They don't understand nuance.
Well, actually, a lot of your students have struggled through.
Yeah, but not at the same rate as my 32-year-olds have. And so one of the things that adult learning really has to understand is that the adult experience can be used to accelerate the learning, but the faculty, the teacher, has to understand how to marry those two things. So the rapid learning can really happen when you make connections between adult issues and the topic, diesel engines that you're using. So there really is a way to approach the learning that combines experience with content knowledge. And I think the other piece is that you have to understand that someone might be I would speak Chinese very poorly if I tried right now. I would sound like less than a 2-year-old. But my conceptual understanding is quite sophisticated. And so how to bring the learning there really requires a content that is both adult focused and content small or basic. And those are skills, I think, that technology is particularly skilled at bringing, because you can really analyze people's speech, the content of the knowledge, and really build the basic infrastructure while understanding that the person who understands that has a complex concept of the world and what goes on. So I think there is a lot to teaching adults that really can be very rapid and very appropriate.
So one thing we've seen is that, and I think you're absolutely right, but this ties closely together with the challenge we have in the education system, that we're bombarding students with so many facts and basic learning objectives. Any suggestions for how many things we're trying to teach kids or the young people in a 2-semester bio course? 3,000 things, 5,000 things, 15,000 things. That's after we cut all the obvious crap. So the thing here is 15,000 things times 4 subjects, it's impossible to do. So the way with adult learners that we've seen, and actually with all learners, but it's particularly impactful with adult learners, is if you give them the basic concepts and understand how to give them the scaffolding, they have a much better, what we can see is it's much easier to accelerate it that way than to try to get them to navigate the mountain of stuff that even regular college students are dying on. So if you're able to do the learning engineering in a way where you can carefully select what is actually more important than other things here, what are the kingpins that if you can get those to drop, you will be able to get the rest of it. I think we can see, and I think there are commercial opportunities in it as well, which is figure out the best ways to exploit that. It also applies to all other learners, but I think it's particularly important with the adult learners because they're not as good learners in terms, their metacognitive skills are not necessarily as good, but their character skills are often very high.
Sharon, you look like you had something to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, our program is in some ways on a completely different planet. Our unions come to us because they want a particular kind of education called labor studies. And what labor studies is all about is really putting the working class experience in the center of the analysis. So every course that we offer starts from the perspective of the working class. And imagining what kind of society we would want for our families and our communities. So our partners are all looking for developing leadership, not so much getting a degree to get out of the working class, but to develop a certain kind of consciousness whereby the labor movement will be built insofar as what kind of critical skills, what do you need to know about how to analyze what's going on in the world that affects you. I mean, 80% of the population are workers. So the unions aren't looking for a quick fix in terms of how do we rush people through the program. Our contract with them is to have all face-to-face classes. We have about 300 students a night. We have a lot of informal gatherings. We have what's called Food for Thought almost every night of the week, whereby classes get together and discuss various contemporary labor issues. So the whole point for us is building a particular kind of perspective, while of course we stay within all the requirements of the general education requirements, et cetera, that we're under by the State University of New York. So we're not into rushing people through the program.
Becky, I think you have a
Yeah.
very different model.
So our classes are 8 weeks long. We offer them year-round. Every month they start. But the most interesting thing, as I was telling Iris, we have an opportunity for students in all of our undergrad programs to self-study on their own and self-test, learn, have links to all the reading materials. It's all free. And then just before they're ready to actually take the exam, they pay $250, and that covers the proctoring and the grading. Less than 10% of our students actually utilize that. Average age is 35. Everything's there. They can do this. And yet, they want the self-paced class. And so when we've asked students, why are you doing this when it's so much cheaper? It's, $1,050, I guess, if you take a 3-credit course, or it's $250. And the answer comes back is that what they are doing in the class, what they're doing in their assignments, the discussions that they're having with the other students is really workplace applied, and the things that they're learning have value immediately to them. So we look very deeply at this return on investment paradigm. And so if the student feels like they're actually really learning something useful and having a meaningful conversation with their instructor, and I think 92% of our instructors actually have workplace experience in their areas of expertise, so they have a real mentor coach type person to help them. So they can have these conversations, have this mentorship while they're in an 8-week class, and they seem to get a lot out of it because they're not willing to move over and try something that would really reduce the cost of their education.
Go ahead, Ars.
So I just want to add to that
I need to ask permission. Jump in.
actually, so the 8-week courses are actually much shorter than traditional courses, and the fact that they're all year round is actually, there is quite a bit of evidence that that kind of acceleration is really great for adult students, because what they can do is they can get enrollment intensity and they can continue to build momentum while only focusing on one class even at a time, and still get almost a full, well, basically a full-time load if they take it all year round. That actually seems to work really well for a lot of adult students. And it also, what you're talking about is great, because there's also evidence that adults get, so there's a lot of evidence that shows for traditional students they have to be engaged on campus to persist. And that's actually not true for adults. For them, it's about being engaged in the classroom and being very connected to the other students in the classroom. And somebody talked about how do you get rid of the isolation. Everything you do for them kind of needs to be in that classroom setting. So the faculty member and the other students are really important to helping that student persist, feel supported, and in that program. So it's.
And I just want to underline.
Class actually has to be very different then. It can't just be, the professor has a very,
Yes.
more broader role.
Right, I want to underline what you said, Iris. And I think it goes back to the question about when people are self-paced, but they want some individual stuff.
Right.
The other piece, I think, is the peer impact. And that's quick and it's fast, and particularly when you have groups of adults together, you have that experience. And so effective teaching methodology and pedagogy really creates peer-to-peer learning in a structured way. And again, it can be asynchronous, but those folks then really do respond to each other very immediately and deeply. It's not, oh, we're going to put you in a group and you have to talk to each other. No, they're like, we have to get this thing done, and we're really collaborating on that.
And Iris, I think you bring up a really good point for any of you that are looking to work with adults. So everything we do is fully online, and it's simply because that works for our students to get them through. But we have career development outcomes built into our courses because getting them to the Career Center, it's virtual. They just one click away. They don't go there. So we actually embed those things in with the academic learning outcomes, the workplace learning outcomes. We integrate the Writing Center inside of their courses. The librarian is extremely active in the selection of information that is part of their academic research, so that we integrate everything into that course. And when we think about our first to third term retention, it's 86%. So it's really high, and they are really learning because we do measure that. But it is a really good point, and thank you for sharing that.
And that's the wraparound service.
Yes, exactly.
Like you created wraparound service virtually and connected deeply to the class. And all of those things are very helpful.
But it's service. So wraparound service, that was something that I thought, well, that's not what we do. Our students want service on demand. But if we're talking about learning and what we want them to leave with, we have to get that into the class.
But you're doing career, here's a career service. You're putting those services in a place that's absolutely accessible, and I think that's
Not just
very important.
accessible, unavoidable.
It's unavoidable, and they're getting graded, there's points, there's all of that. But when we've tried to create all these extra services, could we do some convening of different types of industries by city, whatever that is? No, they don't do it. So it's a waste of money.
Go ahead, John. And I also want to, when we're talking about faster, I also want to switch a little bit to granular, which might be a good segue for you as well. Sure. I think this came up in the last panel too. We think about the unit of measure in higher education has generally been the degree, maybe the major, and certainly the course. I think there's probably is a role for a lot more other forms of other units of measure in this process. So.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think one of the things tying the last two sort of segments together is there's nothing, I think, more engaging for an adult learner than the real-time knowledge that the skills that they just invested in learning or having assessed are immediately applicable either at the current job that might actually be funding their own time, either directly or indirectly in that experience, or the job that they're keen to apply for, or the promotion that they want. And you can make that readily visible to a learner in real time rather than hold that certificate or degree out as the final end of that journey. You could be incorporating recognition of those skills and demonstrating how employers actually care about them in real time. Some of the examples of this would be institutions like Brandman University, where an adult learner is enrolled in a competency-based bachelor's degree in IT, maybe with a specialty in, or a bachelor in supply chain management, and each set of competencies cluster into a new kind of credential. Yes, you're on your way to the bachelor's degree if you indeed complete it, and hopefully most will and do, but even before you get there, a set of skills which employers have actually ranked as key and important and clustered together emerge as a digital credential that the employer can see. They could be used for promotions in real time, applying for jobs in real time, and cycling back also to the very innovative work happening across Colorado. Something Becky said earlier that stuck out in my mind was the employers, generally speaking, are very poor at knowing what they actually need and writing job descriptions. I bet if I asked any of you who've been involved in hiring or writing a job description, how many of you Googled that job description from another company, copied it, and made a few tweaks to it to make it yours, right? There's a sort of resumes or description zero for just about every archetypal job, and the fact is people are find it very difficult at describing exactly what the core competencies they're looking for, and so they still fall back on bachelor's degrees, and where there's an industry credential, and in some places they're usually for compliance purposes or occasionally a decent signifier, but that only does one thing. It limits the pool of people that you might ultimately decide to interview. But when you ask people who are even involved in that process, which is most, what are the top 3 or 4 skills you actually need, they're not really written in the job description. They're not prioritized. They're not written in any kind of language that would signal to somebody that this is what's most important and what I should actually get certified in. And back to Colorado, one of the great things that's happening in the community college system in Colorado is asking employers, let me see these job descriptions. You tell us that these jobs, these advanced manufacturing jobs, are taking 9 months to fill. Let me look at the description. And the team at Colorado Community College System looked and said, okay, cross that out, You're asking for 5 years experience in this tool, but that tool didn't exist 5 years ago. It was introduced 2 years ago. Of course you're not getting applicants, but 6 of our campuses actually teach that skill. Let's go ahead and actually create a credential for the skills you actually need. This kind of rivet, this kind of joint, this kind of weld, this kind of programming, this type of mathematical analysis to operate heavy machinery. We'll go ahead and certify them. They've done that. Now there's a range of credentials in advanced manufacturing. The job descriptions now cite those credentials and use the exact same language, so there's a common currency and level of granularity. And the jobs that took 9 months, they can now actually fill in 72 hours. Just do a search. Give me a list of the people of that competency, and that one. It's really a shift to a competency-based assessment, a competency-based hiring system where both groups are at the table, and it actually just takes a little bit of work to get those groups to actually communicate what they need, and then implement a credential that's at a denomination that doesn't summarily dismiss most of the population before they've had a chance to even consider themselves for the job.
How many people in this room hire? And looking, except for IT, where we know that certification system is probably the most established, how many of you have ever sort of hired based on some other certification besides a degree? So I guess that's another question. Is it really out? I don't know if this is a question of a chicken and egg kind of thing. Are there not enough of these sub-degree certifications out there yet? They're not that reliable, or people don't trust them?
The best example would be computer scientists and software developers.
Well, that place, it seems like that's the place it is developed, right?
But it's crazy that you have, everybody claims that they have the best software developers on the planet. There are no yardsticks. And people believe that they can hire, like if it was healthcare, it would be insane if you think you could hire 10 medical assistants and you get a neurosurgeon. But we don't have that yardstick. So you have to develop your own tests. We've worked on it for 15 years trying to figure out how to do that. I wanted to tie another comment to what you were saying, which is that there are actually companies that have been pretty aggressive about building those internal certifications or competences. Hitachi Data Systems is one of them. So they started 5-6 years ago. The chief learning officer at the time, who now works for us, and I apologize, I misunderstood your question. I probably should explain who us and we are. So I'm also the CEO of Area 9 Learning, which builds adaptive learning systems and other things. We built all of McGraw-Hill's adaptive platforms except Alex, which is the math one. We're about 100 people who work both in education but also in cognitive engineering or other things. Coming back to what was fascinating about what Nick Howe did at that time was he was like years ahead of micro-certifications, trying to figure out how do we internally, when we have that relatively large labor force they have, at scale, or at least at reasonable scale, define these competences that where you need, if you have mastery in that, and then base your future career projection on it, or your future career path on it. So they actually have a checkers board of different certifications they can get. They are all competency measured. Like, it's not just a stupid 5 questions at the end. It's completely monitored all the way through how you learn it, and you keep it updated, because that's the other part. One thing is that you get a degree and then you leave it alone for 10 years. But another thing is if you establish a culture where you actually keep reshaping and reinforcing your skills and knowledge.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the role of government policy. Obviously, there's a role for employers in this mix. Trying to think what else might be out there. I've got some thoughts myself, but what else is sort of missing in the ecosystem right now that would help get adults to college, help colleges reach adults? I'm thinking like in our civic life. And again, I'm thinking back to your question again, trying to make, I don't know if this entrepreneurial activity is something that connects these people, but maybe something else will come up also. But from what, all of your experiences, obviously we have the union connection, what else is out there that's sort of an untapped opportunity to help adults and colleges do a better job of serving,
Here's my fantasy mashup. My fantasy mashup is that all you smart folks out there are going to take every single job that's available by zip code, and you're going to allow us to begin to see who filled those jobs. There's some of that going on, but then there is nothing that really allows you to track that down to a person, right? There are these sort of broad kind of categories. So moving to almost the Credley model, like if we could have that level of granularity, you can imagine how exciting that would be. But then the harder thing is, how do you talk about that? How do you communicate that? What can you put so that, I'm 45, I just left my job. It was a great job in healthcare, but now technicians are like overseas and I don't have that job anymore, but I have all these skills. What could I look at that would tell me where to go, that was really actually a place I could work and use some of those skills? So it's really
user-friendly, a version of this that's available to a consumer.
Yeah, it's like like academics, we speak so poorly. Oh my God, we don't know how to say what we do. I mean, it's just sort of like, if you think that employers can't talk about the competencies, talk about what we do. It's like disgusting, it's horrible. And that translation, that sort of taking what is there and putting it into common English and basing it on those data, that's my fantasy, that you sort of help guide me and also help me communicate what's real for the adult students.
Isn't that kind of what Credential Engine's supposed to do? Are you familiar?
Yes, well, not really. I mean, I am familiar. It's really more about the connecting some pieces, but it's based on, like, you please tell us.
Right.
It's not based on an analysis of what happened, and I think that's what you need.
I do think there's a lot of, it feels like there's a lot of companies, a lot of investment capital going towards apps and platforms and things to connect people to careers and this college to career idea. It seems like it's one of the hottest little areas going. But I don't know that I don't know if it's catching on that well, or if it's as useful to students or to maybe to adult students as it needs to be.
You could up your game even more if you connected how to pay for it.
How to pay for the training.
How to pay for the training, right.
Is everyone in the room familiar with this Credential Engine idea?
He wants me to explain it. I hope not.
You must be the person who's running Credential Engine.
No, that's not Scott.
Smart. Okay. Well, let's. Oh.
One of the things that Credential Engine has done is has discovered in pilot with employers that if you can associate the credential with a person's resume,
Right.
it will travel and optimize better through the HR algorithm that is looking for keywords. So yes, you have to go college by college and ask them to give up the credential information. But if you can do it, it does have a real world application. One, help the student get the job, help the student get the interview.
So for those of you who don't know what the broader category is, it's this new online sort of ecosystem, and it's designed to help identify what all kinds of credentials there are out there, everything from degrees to industry offered certifications, and almost like with a click-through button, you could click behind the certification. Goldie, I could, but the trouble with the trouble with it is the same thing. Goldie's certificate of really good journalism, I could put that credential in the Credential Engine, and then you could click behind the button and you could see all Goldie's great reasons why Goldie's credential in really good journalism is a good credential, but no one else says it's that great a credential. It's not really that, it's verified, it's not that verified, it's not that sort of a peer-reviewed in any sort of way, it's just, but it is at least a start to put things in one place where people can start to know what all these various credentials are. It's part of this ecosystem. I do wonder if that's going to be something that's going to be a step to make the adult market, the adult, educational experience more valuable later on, if they're going to be able to sort of take advantage of some of these tools and some of this ecosystem.
Maybe one thing to add on that, and like you, we're involved in Credential Engine and been kind of part of the committee that's working on it. I think one thing that on the technical side, one thing that's worth saying about it is it ties back to your first question about cultural changes. What Credential Engine is trying to do is essentially create a markup language that says if you're involved in training, assessment, education, if you offer courses or credentials or certifications, let's give you a common way of describing and publishing those credentials on the web to make it easier for machines and robots and apps and entrepreneurs to find it and to sort it out and to compare different elements of each credential to each other to help create tools that create more informed pathways. And to me, it's part of that new movement towards creating a culture of recognition and putting more data in. When you think about it, we've talked about how the degree has largely been the kind of pinnacle of the currency of talent and of human capital, and that's changing. There's new denominations. One way we get there, it's very similar to how the shift we had in education to using learning management systems. There was this 10, 15, arguably more 20-year move to just get every institution to put syllabi and curriculum and assessments and homework assignments and being able to drop off your work online. It was really just an analog to digital shift that in turn then made room for potentially scaling up the number and the type of learners that we could reach and the kinds of countries and places where that education makes a difference. Now we're in a similar place with recording outcomes. We didn't really do anything with recording outcomes during that shift from analog to digital with learning opportunities, but now we're saying, okay, at the end of one of these things, whether one of these things is at a formal degree-based program or one of these things is an on-the-job training activity that I did, let's record that in some kind of portable way. Let's do it where there's sort of structured data languages or structured data formats we can use so there's at least an attempt at some consistency in what kind of data we're capturing. But I think the big part that's untapped right now and a lot of people are struggling with is maybe we have to bring order to all of these credentials. We have to figure out how to catalog them and which pathways are the proven or the best ones that we should be presenting to anyone in a given moment. Patience, that's the part that happens after you start recording all of that stuff. You need to record it before you can start having a real meaningful way of analyzing it. And that's where you put the robots, the algorithms, the machines on a much larger data set than we've ever had. And because unlike most course offerings, which sort of put the courses online in a siloed format, the outcomes are being done in open standard ways where the credentials can actually live beyond those systems, where the people are free agents and their skills can be discovered and found. That's where it really starts to shift. And then you get to apply
So
some
those Hitachi,
analysis.
was that your company?
Yeah.
So those Hitachi skills could actually be on this platform as well in some way
Absolutely.
people can understand. Who's got some questions here? And I don't know, is this the mic? This is probably our only mic, but does anyone here have a question right now that they want to ask? We've got a few, obviously we've got some more time to discuss this, but I wanted to make sure we're hitting everybody's question in the room here. Is anything all right, hold your thought there. We'll get back to you if you have some more. I want to go to the question here. I guess even a little bit more specifically, we talked a little bit about making some connections between business and the skills. I guess it's some kind of entrepreneurial interventions on the helping to fix the skills gap. Where else do you think you would love to see entrepreneurial capital get thrown at some of these adult issues right now?
I was thinking about what Gail said about money, right? So we know that non-traditional adult learners, the reason they disconnect, reason number one and number two, time and money. And so apps that help them immediately source, there's a lot of grants. There is so much money out there, but it's too hard. It's too much information. So to be able to put in your characteristics, almost like, I guess, like a Match.com, right? You put in your things and you can get automatically matched up with money would be good. And I think helping students get organized. They know that a course, 3-credit course, takes 10 to 15 hours per week. So they could plug in all their information as to exactly when they need really block time, and all those open pieces would help them know that they need to study, they need to work on their discussion board, and it reminds them and automatically schedules their open areas for time so that they can successfully complete their courses.
Is anyone going to invest in that?
Well, it sounds like AI coaching.
AI coaching?
Yeah,
Yeah, that would help.
it is. Yep.
There is a lot of AI coaching right now in the undergraduate market, or it's developing. I think and obviously we talked about a little bit from the wraparound services.
I'm into shaming, so I want an app that really shows by college the number of transfers they take, how easy that is, the number of students who transferred credits in, the number of certificates that they link so that you can scale them. I mean, it's sort of one of the reasons higher ed gets away with some of this is that we aren't very public. You can't see that part. And I think technology, by forcing it out in the open and saying, do you understand? I mean, it's funny for me because I can get almost any student to get all of their credits accepted from LaGuardia Community College, including some credit for prior learning that we do a lot of that mix. At like Yale and Brown, I can't often get it at SUNY New Paltz, and so those are the kinds of things that would be cool to make public what's happening, and then of course you good entrepreneurs could sell that to the colleges who looked good on that and really allow that to flourish. So I really think there's a market in shaming.
So we've been doing a lot of work around predictive analytics and implementing those systems in colleges, and our focus on it is actually ethical implementation, so you're not accidentally hurting students who are adults, for instance, who come in. Schools need a lot of help around implementing, in my experience so far, implementing these systems, particularly schools that maybe aren't quite as tech savvy as yours. And one of the things that we recommend in our paper is for schools to do training with their faculty and staff around interpreting data correctly. I don't know if there's a tech fix to that, but I've had many schools ask me, well, who would you recommend come in and train our faculty and staff around interpreting data correctly? And I was like, I have no idea. I have never heard of that, but it is very necessary.
Don't
and
colleges kind of have programs that do this, like statistics?
So yes, you would think, not training, right? They teach undergrads that maybe, but we all know that the faculty structure in higher education does not necessarily reward faculty for helping administrators do their jobs better. That is not a thing, and actually I've talked to people who said they tried to work with their math departments and got nowhere because that's not how they get tenure, it's not how they advance, it's not how they're rewarded. And so really they need external people to come in and help them know things like, just because there's a chance that this is gonna happen to a student, that doesn't mean that it's actually gonna happen to the student. And like, how do you act on it and what do you do around that? And so that's definitely a need we have seen in our work on that.
Anybody else have a business opportunity for this?
Maybe a more general comment, which is, so we see, I was at McGraw-Hill and the executive team there, we saw hundreds and hundreds of startups every year. And last year, I think Richard Keaveney, who's the head of strategy now, he said he saw 800 last year. He didn't invest in one. And I think there is an urgent need, or there is a opportunity in the same thing as you've seen in healthcare and in pharma, that the niche drugs are actually the ones to invest in. It is a matter of everybody have been chasing the same 5 or 6 themes for the last 10 years. And all of these themes are actually in the hundreds of millions of dollars to get to, which means that if you throw $2 million after a startup company, your chances of success are very low. Even if you do it 100 times, 2 times 100 does not give you 101 of them. So it's very simple math. But there are some opportunities out there which are niche problems. I'm advising on the side of a small company. It may be a feature, it may be a product. But my biggest problem with the founder, who I love him, he's a great educator, but he still doesn't get that he has no chance of ever exiting that company over $20 million. He should actually be happy if he gets 10, but it's still absolutely worthwhile. So if you just geared it from the beginning to be a niche play, like you see in healthcare, like I'd love to see that over the next years, and I'll personally fund some of them, because I think that is a much more interesting thing than when somebody shows up with the same thing that everybody else have failed doing, except the 5 big ones.
One thing I've been wondering about is, I think that this is a giant imperative for higher education. I think people talk also about the risks to higher education if they don't serve this market well. But really, we hear a lot about the boot camps. Oh, the boot camps are going to take the students. There's only so many boot camps, and they graduate 20,000 students a year, and that's nowhere near the number of adult students that are out there. What are the other real competitors to higher ed in this environment right now that higher ed needs to sort of pay attention to. If not, they could either eat their lunch or maybe not eat their whole lunch, but take a little niche bite out of their lunch. And you know, like what else will adults start to go to if higher ed does not adapt more readily?
This is a little tongue-in-cheek, but the labor market. This is why we have counter-cyclical enrollment spikes in higher education. So when the labor market gets weak, people enroll in college, and then when the labor market gets strong, they don't go to college. And you see this in most of the public systems.
I think some of you saw the numbers that just came out today from the National Student Clearinghouse. The drop in adult students was one of the greatest it's been in a long time.
Right, and community college systems in particular, like this is I think it's a huge problem for community colleges and a lot of maybe the for-profit sector, but everyone really. If you don't give a good value proposition to adults who really actually could benefit from coming back and finishing a degree, and that would help them pursue more in their careers, then they're just not going to do it unless they're forced to by the economy.
And
Well-
I think, oh, I'm sorry.
That was me. Although in the past, corporations and businesses used to take on the training of their employees themselves. And now that's been transferred onto the individual, right? It's the individual who has to assume the cost and going to college and seeking out the training. So, it's a transfer onto, the public. And the other thing I wanted to mention, I don't think there's enough real attention to the seriousness of advocating for free higher education for all those who qualify. In New York, as you know, we have the Excelsior program, which supposedly somewhat speaks to this, but I know at Empire State College, only 2% of our 17,000 students even qualify for this little bit of free higher ed because of the stipulations, which I don't really probably need to repeat, but
You need to be a full-time student.
right, you need to be a full-time student. Working adults are
And you need
not
to be willing to stay in the
full-time
state.
students. So I think there needs to be more serious concern about free higher education for those who qualify.
Goldie, I would just also echo what Iris was saying. I think one trend within talent management within the corporate sector is to play to what is required of attracting new talent and new entrants into the workforce, all entrants in the workforce, especially those who are looking at their first jobs or their fourth or their fifth jobs, are looking for a place where they can continue their education and their learning while they're working, right? And so they want a job that either provides benefits, provides actual training programs, that issues certifications. They want to have something to show for their time at that company that ensures that they will be marketable when it's time to move on. And there's a recognition, however, that while that sounds counterintuitive to an employer about investing in that person's next job, the data shows that when you invest in their education, they actually stay longer. If you have a tuition assistance program or a tuition benefits program, you'll get someone to stay a full 3 or 4 years, whereas they might have stayed 18 months. If you might not have actually had someone start a job with you who's the kind of person you want, eager to learn, able to learn, wanting to pick up new skills, if you're not demonstrating to them on the hiring front that you're the kind of place where they can build up their credential profile, their set of skills. And so that's becoming a sort of must-have on the benefit side of corporations. So to your question, I would say that it's not an either-or proposition. I'm not suggesting that higher ed should worry that's going to replace degree-based programs, but it's a great opportunity because you have very willing partners. You see things like Northeastern beginning to accept badges issued by IBM. New America did a piece recently talking about some of the new programs that are packaging industry credentials and providing handoffs from tech certifications to degree-based programs. So what a great opportunity, actually, for higher ed to form partnerships with increasingly willing partners.
And I want to give a shout out to Credley and the work that they did with LaGuardia, because we looked at skills that are not competency-based, if you will, not in a content way, but really are sort of the soft skills. And so we did badging in some of our co-curricular activities. And for identifying employees, having that list really documented and verified by a college, and the badge that we created with Credly, I think is another way to think about how to move forward into the workplace. And again, it's a place where adults should have some, they have a little more head start than a 19-year-old.
Was yours an adult-focused badge?
No, it wasn't an adult-focused badge, but I think adults bring often that ability, and to credential that then allows an upgrading of, I'm moving into a new industry, but I bring with you these kinds of skills. And it was a really cool project, and really had people thinking about how does one live, right? And being a good employee is more than knowing how to do the particular weld. It's also really, being able to play well in teams, being able to take initiative, and those were some of the things we were able to credential, so.
So if I'm hearing everybody right, it's not so much this question, maybe there's not going to be 20 versions of General Assembly out there that are going to pop up and take students, but maybe the approach is really almost co-opt what's out there a little bit and find ways to credential what's being done in traditional work environments. But are there other organizations or opportunities out there where colleges even need to be doing that? Thinking about ways to sort of validate what the adult's been learning in other places.
I think one of the opportunities is that right now, business and industry spends on training of their employees basically the equivalent to all the money we spend in public higher education. It's sort of like almost a one-to-one. And so to sort of let those two systems go without integrating them seems like a tragic waste of dollars. And so as higher ed is really particularly public higher education, which educates 80% of everybody in America, to not understand that those systems could be brought together, I think is an incredible waste.
We do quite a bit of that at CSU Global, looking at employers' training and trying to provide credit. And it's expensive. It is, because the faculty have to do the reviews. We can do it quickly within 10 days. But it is something where would employers make those investments? Yeah. And I think we have a lot more to do to educate them that this is really worthwhile. But we have set up processes for it. Yeah.
Question?
Maybe you know about this, or maybe not. I was at EDUCAUSE recently and was listening to Phil Long, the Chief Innovation Officer at UT Austin. And he was talking about something that he was doing around credentialing with Salesforce.org. And blockchain.
Blockchain.
Is that
We're back to blockchain.
Relevant, or is that something different than what you've been talking about?
All right, blockchain, baby, go. Who wants blockchain?
We can either all do this, or I can take it. So blockchain. So I'm not sure where to start with that one, actually, but blockchain is an example of one of the new and emerging open standards for recording outcomes or any kind of contract, which really a credential or an achievement through a training or academic or any other kind of program is. It's somebody saying, I earned this, and somebody else validating and saying they did, and maybe some data about the details of that transaction, so to speak. And so the whole notion of having that recorded somewhere that survives your relationship with the contracting party, with the other institution, is really, I think, at the heart of a lot of things we're talking about here, and also the question that came from that side of the room earlier about how do I ensure that the credentials or the skills that I've picked up across institutions carry over. One way, whether it's through blockchain or other open standards or an evolving set or a combination of these things, is to make sure that the individual owns the record, that it's written in a way that multiple groups can kind of, at the discretion of each party, be able to read or consume in a reliable way. And so I think ultimately where blockchain plays out, I'm not sure if this was at the heart of the question, but it may have been at one of the earlier ones, but is those underlying trends towards portability and end user ownership and sort of breaking down the silos is what's driving that. I think there'll be many iterations of the open standards. There's things going on at W3C. IMS Global has been providing a lot of leadership over the original open badge standard. There's a range of these that will ultimately, I think, begin to coalesce or to kind of form niche.
So we
niche
did the
plays.
pivot on your question, sorry.
I did.
But actually, it sounds like blockchain in a way would solve the problem that Becky just described earlier, because if you could put your credentials in the blockchain, then that school couldn't hold up your transcript later on because you could own it and have it.
I'm sorry, but it seems to me they're two different things. Blockchain is a mechanism for doing this, but you still have to have the standards and
Right.
the agreement that these are the credentials and standards.
Well, yeah, and well, for the credentials that nobody understands, that's still a problem. For the associate's degree from LaGuardia Community College, that's already sort of an understood thing. Will LaGuardia just start letting those be recorded in blockchain, and so that later on somebody can get that credential and present it, even if they didn't pay their library fine, is going to be kind of.
But to go to your Salesforce question, here's both the power and the challenge of that, right? So if you are a college and Salesforce comes to you and says, I need to train, 10,000 X's, whatever the X is, in using and modifying the Salesforce infrastructure. And I say, terrific. If what I do then is create a Salesforce-only curriculum, then those students won't have the mobility that you need. And of course, Salesforce wants me to understand how to do that well, but not so well that I'm giving away the company secrets. And I think those things are really still sort of a challenge and interesting. Like, how do you make a tight enough marriage with a big business like Salesforce that is really important and is taking over the market without harnessing yourself to a very narrow curriculum? And I don't think we really know the answer to that yet.
And I think it's a much bigger problem than people give it credit for. So we work with companies like McDonald's, and they really see it as a company trade secret how they train people to flip freaking burgers. Like, how secret can it be? Like, but it's almost impossible to get to help them improve those training things because they find basic stuff like that so secret. I'm at the advisory board for Center for Curriculum Redesign at Harvard, and Charles Fidel is on one of the other panels right now. Otherwise, you should actually go listen to him instead. So and I had the discussion with him just like a Sunday ago, where he wanted to have a really open sharing of some of these standards. It's like, it's not gonna happen for the adult market. I think for some of the things we can agree, but I think we're in the early days of trying to figure out that balance because the company's treated way more confidential than we believe from a curriculum design point of view is appropriate.
So I want to kind of end this up where we started a little bit. We talked a little bit about the sort of the economic imperative for colleges, and we didn't deal too much with that today. And obviously we talked about a lot of the economic imperative for the country and for the employees. But what about that broader sort of civic imperative? What happens to us as a nation if we continue to have this big gap between people who have degrees and don't have degrees? I mean, do we just go along as we've been going along and things are great, or does something change in our country? So I think I'm going to just have each of you kind of take that question as we wrap this up. Gail, take it.
So one of the things I think we often think, it's about people going or not going to college, but I do think the larger context is the world of work, as you all know, actually, as you help foment, is changing irrevocably. We are not going back to a place where a high school diploma is plenty, you're going to have a great job, you're going to be able to buy your car and your apartment. So part of it is to understand that we're at one of these inflection points in a generational and cultural way, and to see that if we don't bring everybody along, that we are going to have incredible dislocation. But I think even if we do, we're at a moment of incredible dislocation. So I tend to be I'm the pessimist on this one.
I've kind of gotten numb to that part of it after having been scared about it for 15 years. Right now I'm actually much more scared about something else. So we own a company that takes people out of jobs because we build really, really sophisticated machine learning stuff we combine with how people think. The pace by which we can take people out of jobs is so high that we, like, I think, yes, some of the doomsday guys out there, they may be too radical, but 1.6 million truck drivers is a validated fact. So if we have that, we're for the first time in history looking at a disaster if we don't figure out to do something about the non-degrees. Like, the degrees is one thing, but we're looking at something that is much, much worse. We need to figure out what the heck do we do with the guys who will be superfluous in less than 10 years.
But you're taking out people with PhDs, right?
Sorry?
You're taking out people with PhDs, right? With your machine learning?
Some of them, yes. But also people in call centers, like, we can make them 3 times more efficient after you put in automation and robotics and all the other things. You can literally make them 3 times more efficient at decision making. So it's also the intelligent jobs, the people in Google's AdWords support centers that are doing a heroic job. This is a cognitively highly challenging job where you can inform their decision making. You can't completely automate it, but you can make them so much better by augmenting their human decision making. So you're looking at superpowers to humans, which means that you need less of them.
Sure.
Well, I guess I want to go back to free higher education for everybody who qualifies. And I want to support the liberal arts.
Agreed.
I don't think that education should be totally geared towards social mobility. I think there are other reasons that one seeks education. There's a very famous labor leader, very progressive, his name was Tony Mazzocchi, and he really felt that workers should have sabbaticals, just like other people have sabbaticals. And they could go to school, they could do whatever they wanted to. And it's probably, seems like heresy, but why not? And I just wanted to, one of the questions that we deal with a lot in our program is, why should labor go to college? And it's an overarching question. And I'm just going to read a couple sentences that some students wrote. And one of our students wrote, and remember, these are electricians. For me, college is a way to do the critical thinking I'll need to accomplish moving my family out of poverty, okay? It's not necessary, on the one hand, yes, it's about getting a job. On the other hand, there's a political component in terms of what do we need to do collectively to address things like inequality, et cetera? How do we understand it? How do we move beyond that? Another student wrote, for starters, even manual labor is better performed with an education behind it, but it goes further than that. It is important to have an understanding of the world around you. Not having a thorough education sets you at a disadvantage against everyone else because education is important to defend yourself politically and socially. And I think we can't forget that component of the liberal arts.
I agree.
I don't know how much more I have to add. I definitely agree with everything that's been said, and I don't think it's going away. I think that one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is because I think that the economy is going to continue to reward people with more education and be very, very difficult for people with less education. Whether or not, I don't think that's a good thing, but I don't really see how to change it necessarily. So that's why I would really think that more and more adults need to get some post-secondary credential. And I think one way to do that is to create pipelines with employment, and hopefully we're able to scale those.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also see it with increasing diversity, just the globalization, right? So we're now seeing that people can do things differently, be different. There is not just one treadmill headed towards a degree, right? So you don't get on and then you just get your degree and are successful in the workplace. I just see that increasingly people's ability to customize their environment, customize their tennis shoes, right, Nike, that in fact they will be doing this with their careers. So they will have different pathways towards what they see as success, whether it's workplace or whether it's liberal arts and having a broader horizon, but that we as people are understanding that different is okay, and therefore I just see that there is not just going to be one track anymore. It is not ultimately just higher education or a bachelor's degree, master's degree. So it really kind of moves along with what everybody said. But to one question, Goldie, you asked about competitors. I really look at how do you fill this void with AI? I see Google, Amazon, Salesforce, those big tech companies, man, what they could do with education. They have a huge capacity to do it and a lot of money. And when we talk about where to be afraid, those are the companies, but we're going to need them because with AI coming out, we have way too many people to re-educate, re-advance to whatever level they want and need. So I see that as the future. Yeah.
Good. Very thoughtful answers. I just yesterday I was asked by a colleague to review a job description before it went out for a new member of our team, and it was a new person of our team writing the job description to hire his next team member, and one of the first bullets in the requirements section said 3 to 4 years digital marketing experience or something like that, and I was like, no, that doesn't go in credly job descriptions. You must have something in mind when you say 3 to 4 years. What do you hope someone will have shown to demonstrate for you in those 3 to 4 years that you're actually looking for? Don't rely on the number of years. I don't care if you say they have to have 20 years or 0 years. Describe what it is that you want them to have. And that one bullet became 3 bullets, and it was very concise and clear. And there was some nice kind of fun language that describes what that person should be able to do. But to me, I think the civic responsibility here is, I'm not worried about people who have a good proxy degree or worked at the kind of companies that act like degrees. Having Google on your resume often gets you an interview anywhere, and having an elite college degree often gets you an interview anywhere. But what can we do to make sure that while we're introducing new ways of recording outputs and qualifications and skills, to make sure that we don't create new barriers? And just last quick thought on this, when I was first starting in this work a few years ago, there was an educator at the Museum of Modern Art who was really interested in issuing credentials, thought this was a topic, but has become the little caution devil on this shoulder that I look at a few times a week, which he said, the people who come to my programs and develop skills like critical thinking and artistic ways to solve problems. He runs programs for incarcerated young adults. He said, they come to my programs not for the credential, but because this is the place where they're not being held to any kind of, nobody's telling them there's a right way or you have to be this tall to ride this ride. And I think it's important that that credentials to me are an additive thing. They're a way of building up a portfolio of skills, and it's our civic responsibility to make sure everyone has a full story to tell, no matter how that story unfolded.
Thank you. We've run out of time. I want you all to know this panel has done an incredible amount of work, so please join me in thanking them.
Perfect. No.